Up next on the broadcast, President Park's newly formed Committee on Reunification holds its first meeting, and its first step will be to draw up measures to build up North Korea's infrastructure and improve the lives of its people. Wartime control over Korea's own military may be delayed until the year 2020 upon Seoul's request to bolster defense and build up counters to North Korean threats. And a suspected Ebola victim, a 40-year-old man who returned from a business trip in Sierra Leone, dies in Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, Liberia declares a state of emergency from the rapidly spreading virus. Primetime News begins now. Welcome to Primetime News, live from Seoul. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Tae-ri. Welcome to the program. Not to be forgotten, on the same stage with economic and social reforms, President Park Geun-hye continued with her agenda of realizing a peaceful reunification of the Korean peninsula.
The Presidential Reunification Committee on this Thursday held its very first meeting since being formed last month. Our Ji Myung-gil reports on how this diverse group will prepare the way for what the president calls the bonanza of the future.
The Park Geun-hye administration has placed a priority on economic reform in recent weeks, but has also shifted its focus back toward a unification drive with North Korea, an initiative that was overshadowed by April's very tragedy and the escalation of provocations out of North Korea. President Park on Thursday ordered members of a newly established 50-member special committee to draw up measures for building up infrastructure in North Korea and improving the lives of the North Korean people as a first step.
북한 지역의 인프라를 구축하고 주민들의 삶의 질을 높이는 것은 당장의 인도적 차원에서도 의미가 크겠지만 통일 이후를 대비하는 중요한 기초 공사이기도 합니다.
The committee plans to conduct joint government and civilian research for unification and arouse greater public interest in the matter. President Park has said that a reunification of the two Koreas will be an economic bonanza for the peninsula and neighboring countries. During a speech in Dresden, Germany in March, she called for bolstering cross-border exchanges as a first step toward building trust between the rival Koreas and laying the groundwork for unification. The two Koreas have been divided for more than 6 decades following the 1950 to 1953 Korean War, which ended in a ceasefire, not a peace treaty. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Talks on extending the transfer of Washington's wartime operational control over the South Korean military have been ongoing for months now, but Seoul and Washington may be nearing a conclusion to delay the transfer another 5 years to the year 2020. Yoo tells us more.
Talks on transferring the wartime operational control of South Korean forces from Washington to Seoul are underway, and it looks like the transfer will be delayed by 5 years to 2020. Delegations led by Korea's Deputy Defense Minister Ryu Jae-seung and U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia David Helvey are currently in Washington to discuss the appropriate timing. Sources there say they agree South Korea's military needs more time to bolster its defense and other capabilities to counter threats posed by North Korea. This meeting is crucial as it could be the last round of talks before the two allies announced their agreement at their annual defense ministerial meeting in Washington in October. The U.S. took control of South Korean forces during the Korean War back in the early 1950s. Peacetime control was returned in 1994, and the South Korean military is set to achieve full autonomy next year if it takes over wartime operational control as previously scheduled. But following Pyongyang's third nuclear test in February last year, Seoul had asked Washington to delay the transfer. South Korea's defense minister Han Min-gu has also been pointing to the changing circumstances behind Seoul's request, emphasizing that North Korea has been carrying out realistic drills since Kim Jong-un took power in 2012. Yoo Arirang News.
Two Korean survivors of Japan's wartime sexual slavery system are visiting the U.S., and they're on a mission to make sure Japan pays its long overdue price for its war crimes. Last week, they met with White House officials, and word out of Washington is there may be another one coming next month. Our Pak Ji-won reports.
Quoting diplomatic sources in Washington, Seoul-based Yeonam News and YTN report that the White House will soon hold another round of meetings with two Korean victims of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement. Lee Hyuk-sun and Kang Il-chul, both in their 80s, held closed-door talks with White House officials at the end of last month during a 15-day trip to the U.S., which came to an end on Wednesday. The upcoming meetings will reportedly be attended by the White House officials in charge of foreign affairs policies. It's expected they could place pressure on the U.S. State Department to be more proactive in solving the long-standing issue. International calls on Japan to make amends for forcing women into sexual slavery before and during World War II has picked up in recent weeks. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Nabi Pillay criticized Tokyo on Wednesday for failing to resolve the issue. In response to Pillay's criticism, Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said the issue was covered in a 1965 treaty between Korea and Japan, when Korea received some $800 million in aid and loans as part of the settlement. Pillay, whose term ends this month, emphasized that the women continue to suffer decades later due to the senseless remarks of Japanese officials who continue to deny the atrocities were ever carried out, with some even referring to them as prostitutes. Pak Ji-won, Arirang News.
The latest military bullying scandal, where a 23-year-old conscript was found to have died after being bullied for months, is still sending shockwaves throughout the nation.
That's right. The head of Korea's Military Human Rights Center held a press conference today, and he said the victim, identified only by his family name Yoon, was clinically dead by the time he was transported to a hospital. The center chief also claimed that the Army private was killed primarily as a result of a severe beating by his comrades, and again urged his attackers be charged with murder. He also had some new findings. Take a look.
We found that when the victim was sent to the hospital, one of his attackers said, if we are asked about the bruises on his chest, let's say he got them while receiving CPR. This is a serious situation.
Yoon was frequently bullied by his fellow servicemen. He was reportedly forced to hold a horse riding stance until the early hours of the morning, and also told to lick spit off the ground. This is just another in a series of bullying incidents in recent months. An Army sergeant who had allegedly been bullied by his comrades went on a shooting rampage back in June, killing 5.
And to talk more in depth about recent military bullying scandals, Professor Pak Hyuk is joining us in the studio. Thanks so much for being here. So do you think the government's latest measures were enough to deal with these cases from happening in the future again?
I think it is premature to decide, but I think that the approach is the same to the approaches in the past instance. They apologized for the mistakes, and they filed the commanders related to the incident, and they promised not to occur this kind of incident again. And also they composed a special group to investigate into this incident.
But it sounds like you don't think that's enough.
Yeah, the problem is that the previous remedy did not work. For example, we tried to change the culture of the barracks of soldiers. Is it the deep-rooted cause? I'm not sure.
What do you think it is?
Could be some poor quality of the officers. The officers may not have enough ability to control the soldiers. For example, the ROTC officers, they have to serve for 28 months instead of 21 months of soldiers. So the smart young men, do not apply for this program.
So if cases like this happen in the barracks, you're saying the people who are in the somewhat leadership position are not sufficiently capable enough to prevent this from spiraling out of control?
Yes, right.
Are other countries' militaries similarly structured, or do we see a lot of bullying in other nations, or is there something specific about the Korean case?
I think there are some bullies in the other foreign countries also, but I think it is not frequent, I think. And also the approach must be very different. For example, they do not fire all the commanders just after the incident. They would investigate thoroughly into the incident and find the deep-rooted causes and fire the responsible person and cure the problems.
And bullying is not exactly limited to the military here in Korea, or for that matter in many other countries. And we often talk about school bullying as well, and that's probably the reason why President Park Geun-hye mentioned the importance of character building in education. What's your take?
There is some media report that the bullying in the high school may have something to do with this kind of incident.
It will be sort of carried, no?
Yes, you're right. And also, I saw one report that the high school student who was bullied may have some frustration, and when they enter into the military and they got the power by the rank,
right,
they change into the bullying position instead of being bullied position. So this may be the cause of this incident.
So what do you recommend these bullied soldiers do in order to better deal with the situation and protect themselves?
I think that this incident may not that important. I think the remedy should be how to prevent other bullying incident and some accidents, everything's other incidents. That means that I think we need to change our perspectives on soldiers. We think our soldiers as babies of our home. We try to take care of soldiers and control the soldiers. But we have the smartest soldiers in the world. Most of them are college students, and they are well educated. I think they deserve better, and they can take their responsibility. So we need to delegate all the authority, and we need to allow the freedom of actions, and at the same time, we need to teach how to be responsible.
All right, very interesting point to end this conversation. Professor Park, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Curry's comments came in response to
your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Che-ri from the heart of Seoul.
Begins now.
Primetime news, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
The Korean government unveiled a new tax revision bill yesterday to help boost domestic demand, but it was also met with some criticism for being too beneficial for conglomerates only. Korea's finance minister was quick to respond and defend it, saying these measures will ultimately spur Korea's economic growth. Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan defended the government's tax revision on conglomerates, dismissing criticism that the new changes would benefit only the heads of the country's biggest companies. Choi said the proposal is intended to encourage conglomerates to use their cash reserves in ways that would benefit the economy. He said the plan is to boost domestic demand and create a virtuous cycle in which capital flows into households. As a result of conglomerates making investments, paying out dividends, and raising the wages of their employees. Choi says the main reason for the country's sluggish domestic consumption was because household income slowed to a standstill compared to corporate income. Between 2008 and 2013, disposable income among households increased about 30% compared to more than 80% among companies. In the bank, the combined cash reserves among companies was around $460 billion in June, a 44% increase from 2010. The finance minister stressed the need to induce structural changes in order to get the Korean economy back on track. The country's gross domestic product increased a mere 0.6% in the second quarter of the year from the previous quarter, marking its lowest level in 3 quarters. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
Popular text messaging applications KakaoTalk and Line are currently being blocked from usage in China. The Ministry of Science, ICT and Future Planning said Thursday that the Chinese government sent word that it blocked the Korean Messenger program since the beginning of last month because they were used to circulate terrorism-related information. No evidence has been provided to back Beijing's claim, but the Science Ministry says it plans on discussing the matter with the Chinese government in order to lift the blockade on the messaging apps as soon as possible. Various roads in central Seoul will be closed next week ahead of the papal visit. Pope Francis is scheduled to be in the capital city on August 16th to attend a beatification mass. The Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency says starting from next Monday, access will be restricted to some roads around Gwanghwamun Square. A day before the mass, major roads encircling the square will be totally closed off, including a stretch from the central government complex to Sungnaemun Gate. Meanwhile, the Seoul city government plans to temporarily adjust bus routes and subway times to accommodate the high-profile ceremony.
Liberia has declared a state of emergency as it's struggling to contain this deadly outbreak of Ebola.
With more, we now turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, health authorities in West Africa say they're overwhelmed by this growing epidemic, with fears that the virus has reached as far as the Middle East.
Right, and that's what Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf stressed on Thursday when she spoke about the clear and present danger from this rapidly spreading disease. Sirleaf warned that extraordinary measures were needed for what she described as the very survival of the state, adding that some civil liberties may be suspended over the next 90 days. This as the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention issued its highest level alert for the health crisis.
Medical doctors now are not getting access to the patients because they have been attacked. So, and then we also wanted to restrict some of the movement so as to be able to give chance to take charge to be able to control the disease.
Meanwhile, the Saudi Health Ministry said a 40-year-old Saudi Arabian man died of a heart attack on Wednesday while under observation for an Ebola infection. According to the World Health Organization, the death toll from the deadly fever has surpassed 930, with most cases reported in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. And turning now to Russia, where President Vladimir Putin has ordered the closure of its food market to countries that impose sanctions on Russia. Experts say it could severely impact European farmers, as Russia is their biggest buyer of agricultural products. The Russian economy is also likely to take a hit as it's teetered on the edge of a recession. Our Kwon So-wol has the details.
Responding to the tougher economic sanctions recently imposed on Russia by the EU and the US, Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered a one-year ban of agricultural produce, food and vegetable imports on nations that have imposed sanctions against Russia. The government has been ordered to come up with a specific list of goods. Russia's move will have a big impact on Western exporters as Russia imports nearly a third of its fruit products from the EU, and the US is its second biggest poultry importer. In an attempt to lessen the impact on domestic consumers, Russian authorities say they're looking for alternative partners. Talks with Argentina, Ecuador, and Brazil are already scheduled for this week. Earlier, Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev reportedly said Moscow was considering banning European airlines from flying to Asia over Siberia. The sanctions against Russia began with Russia's annexation of Crimea in March, but were strengthened last week, now targeting Russia's defense, financial, and oil sectors. This came in response to Russia's continuous support for pro-Moscow separatists in Ukraine.
We don't know yet whether sanctions are working. Sanctions are working as intended in putting enormous pressure and strain on the Russian economy. If you look at projections for Russian growth, what you're seeing is that the economy has ground to a halt.
Meanwhile, there are concerns Russia could be planning an invasion, as Moscow is believed to have massed some 20,000 combat-ready troops at its border with Ukraine. NATO says Moscow could go in on the pretext of a humanitarian or peacekeeping mission as Kiev gains ground on separatist-held territory. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
A UN-backed tribunal has sentenced 2 surviving leaders of the Khmer Rouge to life in prison after being convicted of crimes against humanity. 88-year-old Nguyen Chia and 83-year-old Kwayu Sampan were found to be complicit in forced executions, mass murders, and evacuations during the Killing Fields Revolution in Cambodia. Prosecutors said Thursday's ruling was hugely significant, saying the 2 had escaped justice for decades. Lawyers representing the 2 men called the verdict unjust and said an appeal would be filed. They will remain in court to face separate charges of genocide in the second phase of the complex trial. As many as 2.2 million people are believed to have died under the brutal regime led by Pol Pot in the 1970s. And finally, scientists at the European Space Agency are celebrating after the Rosetta spacecraft successfully entered orbit of a comet in a historic space mission. Rosetta was first launched in 2004 and traveled billions of kilometers to reach the hurtling piece of ice and rock that was discovered back in 1969. Researchers hope data collected from the comet will help uncover the secrets of the universe.
Will we discover life there or aliens? Of course not. But we're going to make major scientific discoveries, and this is going to be a Rosetta Stone for the future of understanding the solar system we live in and the bigger picture.
But Rosetta's mission isn't done just yet. In November, the European Space Agency plans to land the probe on the comet's surface. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Welcome to sports. Starting off with the FIFA Under-20 Women's World Cup in Toronto, Canada. South Korea played against their first Group C opponent, England. 15 minutes into the game, Lee So-dam gets the first goal with a penalty, making the score 1-0. Korea dominated in the first half, opening up several goal opportunities, but failed to net. In the second half, Korea struggled to contain England, giving up a score, ending the game in a 1-1 draw. Korea will next face Nigeria for the second preliminary match on Sunday. Now over to Thursday's KBO action between the Kia Tigers and the SK Wyverns in Incheon. Starting the pitching game, Justin Thomas for the Kia Tigers and Travis Banworth for the SK Wyverns. With a slow start, Kia gets on board first in the 4th inning with a walk and a double in the 5th inning, making the score 2-0. But SK answers right back in the bottom of the 5th with bases loaded, hits a single and a grounder to jump ahead 3-2. SK dominates in the latter half of the match. Final score 7-2. Checking out other games, Nixon ties the game up in the 9th inning, hitting a 3-run homer, tying the game 5-5. LG is leading in the bottom of the 9th against NC 9-6. Moving on to swimming, it was a disappointing moment for Michael Phelps. He finished 7th in the 100-meter freestyle final at the U.S. National Championship in Irvine, California, ending his hopes to compete in the Pan Pacific Championship later this month. It was to be the most significant race for Phelps after coming out of retirement in May, nearly 2 years after his record 18 Olympic gold medals. He still has a 100-meter butterfly and backstroke, as well as the 200-meter individual medley to qualify for the U.S. team. That wraps it up. This has been Kim Hyun-bin. Always stay tuned for updates from the world of sports.
Good evening, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. Due to continuous rains, temperatures have cooled, bringing some relief from the heat. Now, the rain has stopped in most regions except for in both Chungcheondo provinces, where up to 60 millimeters of precipitation is expected throughout tomorrow. Now, Typhoon Halong has shifted its path a bit and won't have much effect on Korea than we thought. But we are expecting about 200 millimeters of heavy rain and high waves off the coast of Jeju Island and along the southern coast. Now, going over to our temperature readings. Seoul will top out the Friday morning at 23 before reaching up to 32 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will top out at 28 and 27 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops to 28 while Dokdo hits 24, while Mankungang tops to 25. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Michelle. And that's Primetime News on this Thursday. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Kang Chae-ri.
And I'm Sean Lim. Enjoy the rest of your evening. See you soon.